Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Medieval Reader. So today I wanted to have a quick, chatty, casual video about Notre-Dame Cathedral and the recent ruling by the French Senate to restore the cathedral exactly to the way it was before the fire. I want to talk about it because I feel like my opinion is in the minority. I'm not as enthusiastic about the decision as some people, and actually I'm a bit disappointed. But first I wanted to kind of give some facts about the cathedral so we are aware of its history. So it was constructed between 1160 and 1260. It's often presented as a 13th century architecture, but it began in the second half of the 12th century. And it has been restored a number of times. So the spire, part of which was burned in the fire, and the flying buttresses were restored in the 19th century. So in the mid-19th century, there was this huge restoration project, spearheaded actually by Victor Hugo, who wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Notre-Dame de Paris in French. His book actually encouraged the renovation of the cathedral because it was in a bad shape. There had been a lot of damage done to the cathedral during the French Revolution. And while Napoleon had been crowned emperor in the cathedral, it was really shabby and it needed repairs. And so he actually lobbied to have the cathedral restored. And so some of the most iconic parts of the cathedral are actually 19th century creations. So yes, the flying buttress, the jam figures, all of those are definitely products of the late Middle Ages. It's part of Gothic architecture. But the gargoyles, for example, there might have been something similar, okay, in the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. But what you see today is actually an invention of Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, who was the major architect in the 19th century. He was the major renovator of the cathedral. So he kind of used his own imagination to think about, what would medieval gargoyles look like, and then he built his own. Evidently, he inserted himself into one of the gargoyles. Like one of them looks like him, I'm not sure. I will insert a picture if I find it. So yeah, as for the gargoyles, gargoyle comes from the word gargouille, which means throat. So an actual gargoyle is a statue that serves as a water spout. If it's just a statue that's kind of monstrous, but it doesn't serve this purpose of draining water, it's referred to as a grotesque or a chimera. They don't carry water, and actually there are a lot of grotesque, which you might think are gargoyles, but actually don't have a functional purpose. So yeah, this cathedral was built in the 13th century, but it has been renovated, restored, added to numerous times in the past 800 years. And so I feel that it would have been really interesting to repair the damages to the cathedral with some modern additions, some modern architecture, some modern styles. And I think that would have been more medieval than what the Senate has ruled. So the French Senate ruled on May 27th that the cathedral has to be restored exactly as it was before. And this is what had happened in the 19th century when the restorations took place. Then our man, Viollet-le-Duc, I keep forgetting his name, Viollet-le-Duc, had also tried to, recreate exactly what the cathedral looked like in the 13th century. But of course, in doing so, he had to use his imagination and he had to invent new things. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're always inventing new things. And I feel it would have been more medieval to have modern additions. Because in the Middle Ages, there wasn't as much of an attachment to reconstructing the past as it was. Because people thought of themselves as living in this era that was kind of a continuation of the past. So the Roman Empire in the West had fallen, but there was still a lot of references made to the Roman Empire, to Roman laws, to Roman philosophy. And so there was no issue with, even taking older manuscripts and tearing pages out and reusing them in different ways, recycling what today probably would go for millions of dollars. People just didn't have that attachment to artifacts of the past. They were certainly attached to the past. I mean, if you've been following my channel, you know that people are always referencing older epics and older philosophers and older emperors. But people thought of themselves as sort of continuing this tradition, and so there wasn't this need to really preserve artifacts. Now, I completely support the preservation of manuscripts, and certainly the preservation of buildings. But if it's been destroyed, if there are parts that have been destroyed, I feel like this can be an opportunity to do something new and to have new additions. And that's what people did in the Middle Ages. Like these cathedrals, I mean, if you look at Chartres Cathedral, it has 2 different spires. Now that was a newer addition, but there would be paintings of the Annunciation with Mary dressed like a 16th century Renaissance woman. That was, it looks ridiculous to us, but that was totally normal. Whereas today I still feel like when you look at like religious imagery, there's always this attempt at trying to present the people as they were. Of course, not entirely, because blue-eyed Jesus is everywhere. But, there's this idea of like first century Palestine that informs our art. I just think that it would have been more medieval to have done something new. And I guess that depends, I understand. It all depends on how you see the cathedral. So the French government doesn't see the cathedral as a religious monument. It sees it as a national monument, a historical monument. It's not, seen as this religious symbol because of laïcité in France. And so it's being restored. And for many French, this is this case, it is restored as a historic monument, as this building that represents the history of France. And I think that if that's the case, if it is supposed to be a museum, then okay. Then, when we restore paintings or statues in museums, then of course there's an attempt at trying to be as accurate as possible, right? There's this great concern for, reproducing what was before the damage. But if it is a living parish, which again, I'm perfectly aware is not the concern of the French government, but if it is a living parish, then I just feel like not having anything modern kind of is a problem, because it's like it's not living anymore. It's just this museum of artifacts. And it would be really neat, if 800 years from now, assuming we're still alive, that this new stuff would be part of the building, and and maybe people would confuse it with the Middle Ages. I mean, I don't know. I feel like everybody associates everything with the Middle Ages. So if the gargoyles are being, the gargoyles built in the 19th century being associated with the Middle Ages. Maybe, you know, the new roof to the building would also be associated with the Middle Ages. And I think that would be really interesting. I just think that if it's a working church, or it's just a building that is in use, then I feel like it has to have something modern. Otherwise, it's just a museum. And that's kind of how I feel about it. I know that my opinion is not the popular opinion, but I guess that's why I want to make the video, because I think a lot of people have been celebrating the Senate ruling, and I've been a little bit disappointed, and I wanted to make a video about that. If you're interested in learning more about the history of the cathedral, and particularly the gargoyles, I recommend Viollet-le-Duc, Left in Ruins or Rebuilt, which was an article actually published in 2016. It's more like a blog post. It was published in 2016, so this is well before the fire. And in that blog post, it talks a lot about how Viollet-le-Duc's restorations were his own creation. They're like, and that his restorations then become blended in with the original, so that you can't really distinguish the two. So yeah, let me know what you think about the restoration of the cathedral. I know that my opinion is in the minority, but I thought if I don't make a video about the cathedral, who else on BookTube is going to make a video about the cathedral? I might as well, as the medieval reader. Thank you everybody for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.